The cruelest thing about high society isn't how they destroy you in public. It's how they smile while doing it. The ballroom of the Sterling Imperial Hotel shimmered beneath layers of golden crystal chandeliers that looked expensive enough to buy a house in Beverly Hills. Soft piano music floated through the air, while waiters in white gloves carried trays of champagne across the marble floor. Women in designer gowns laughed behind diamond-covered fingers. Men in tailored tuxedos discussed investments worth more than most people would earn in a lifetime. And in the middle of that glittering room, Evelyn Monroe realized she had not been invited there to celebrate. She had been invited to be humiliated. Victoria Ashford stood near the center stage in a silver couture gown that hugged her like liquid moonlight. Every camera in the ballroom followed her movements as if she were royalty. She smiled perfectly, elegantly, dangerously. The future Mrs. Sterling. The woman who had replaced Evelyn in every photo, every headline, every memory Damien Sterling wanted the world to see. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Victoria said smoothly into the microphone, her voice echoing through the ballroom. Family legacy matters more than anything, especially knowing who truly belongs beside you. A wave of polite laughter moved through the guests. Evelyn remained seated near the back of the room, her black satin dress simple compared to the luxury surrounding her. She looked beautiful anyway, not because she was trying to compete with them, but because pain had refined her into something colder, sharper, untouchable. She lifted the champagne glass slowly, hiding the slight tremble in her fingers. Then the lights dimmed. A giant screen behind Victoria flickered to life. Evelyn's breath caught instantly. Old photographs appeared across the massive display. Her wedding photos with Damien. Their tiny first apartment in Chicago. Cheap furniture. Shared coffee cups. Late-night smiles before money poisoned everything. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Victoria tilted her head with fake sympathy. "I thought it would be sweet to honor Damien's journey," she said. "After all, every empire starts somewhere." More laughter. Softer this time. Meaner. Damien stood beside Victoria wearing a custom black tuxedo worth more than the rent Evelyn once struggled to pay while supporting him through business school. He did not stop her. That hurt more than the screen itself. Because he looked embarrassed by Evelyn now, as if loving her had become the one poor investment he regretted. The next photo appeared. Evelyn wearing a diner uniform at 24 years old. Tired eyes. Forced smile. Victoria covered her mouth delicately. "Oh my God," she whispered loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "I almost forgot she used to work there." Several people chuckled openly now. Evelyn heard every single one of them. The clinking glasses. The whispers. The cruelty disguised as sophistication. But she refused to break. She sat there with her spine straight and her chin lifted while the room tried to reduce her to a joke. Because dignity, she had learned, was sometimes the only thing nobody could steal. Then she felt it. Someone watching her. Not with pity. Not with amusement. Across the ballroom, near the grand staircase, stood a tall man in a black suit. Older. Calm. Powerful in the terrifying way truly wealthy men often were. Nathaniel Graves. One of the most private billionaires in America. Unlike everyone else in the room, he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking directly at Evelyn, as if he already knew something the others didn't. Victoria raised her champagne glass proudly. "To new beginnings," she announced. The crowd applauded. But Nathaniel Graves never took his eyes off Evelyn Monroe. And for the first time that night, she realized the story they were telling about her was not the real story at all. The worst kind of betrayal is not when someone leaves you poor. It is when they leave you pretending they became rich without you. Evelyn did not leave the Sterling Imperial Hotel immediately after the applause faded. She sat there for another 30 seconds while strangers whispered around her like she could not hear them. The giant screen behind Victoria finally turned black again, but the damage had already been done. Or at least that was what everyone in the ballroom believed. A waiter approached quietly and asked if she wanted another glass of champagne. Evelyn smiled politely and declined. Her voice never cracked. "I am fine," she said softly, even though the knot in her chest felt heavy enough to stop her breathing. Across the room, Damien laughed at something one of his investors said. The sound hit her harder than the photographs had. Because years ago, that laugh belonged to a completely different man. Before private jets. Before headlines. Before billion-dollar mergers and luxury towers with the Sterling name glowing across skylines from Manhattan to Miami. Back when he still looked at Evelyn like she was the center of his universe instead of an embarrassing chapter he wanted erased. 7 years earlier, there had been no ballroom, no champagne towers, no designer tuxedos. Just a tiny apartment outside Chicago with broken heating and a mattress on the floor because they could not afford a bed frame yet. Damien studied business textbooks until 2 in the morning while Evelyn worked double shifts at a roadside diner off Interstate 90. The smell of coffee and fryer oil used to cling to her clothes no matter how hard she scrubbed them clean. Every Friday night, she brought home leftover pie slices wrapped in foil because that was all they could afford for dessert. Damien always kissed her forehead and promised her it would not be forever. One day, he used to whisper while snow hit the apartment windows, "I am going to buy you the kind of life people dream about." And Evelyn believed him. God, she believed every word. She paid his tuition when his scholarship disappeared. She sold her grandmother's wedding ring to help him attend a networking conference in New York. She typed investor emails for him after exhausting 14-hour shifts because he was too tired to keep his eyes open. She memorized his presentations better than he did. She built him with love so quietly that he eventually forgot she was part of the foundation at all. Then came the first $1 million. Then the interviews. Then the expensive watches. And somewhere between success and status, Damien Sterling learned how to look through her instead of at her. The woman who once held him together during panic attacks became the woman security escorts ignored at corporate parties. Evelyn still remembered the exact moment she realized another woman had entered his life. It was not lipstick on a collar or perfume on his shirt. It was silence. Damien stopped telling her things. His phone turned face down during dinner. His smile became delayed, distracted, distant. And then Victoria Ashford appeared beside him in a magazine article covering young elite couples in Manhattan. Old money. Political family. Perfect image. Evelyn had stared at the glossy page for nearly an hour without crying. Some heartbreaks were too deep for tears. Back inside the ballroom, Evelyn slowly stood from her chair. The orchestra continued playing soft piano music while guests pretended not to stare at her. But she felt their eyes anyway. The pity. The judgment. The satisfaction. As she walked toward the exit in her black satin heels, she passed beneath another massive portrait of Damien and Victoria smiling beneath crystal lights. America's new power couple. Beautiful. Wealthy. Untouchable. Then a calm voice stopped her near the grand staircase. "You were the one who built him," Nathaniel Graves said quietly. Evelyn turned slowly. The billionaire stood beneath the golden chandelier with one hand in his pocket, his expression unreadable. "And one day," he continued, "they are going to regret teaching you how power works. Some people enter your life to love you. Others enter your life to reveal who everyone truly is." The rain outside the Sterling Imperial Hotel fell softly against the glass entrance as Evelyn stepped onto the empty sidewalk beneath the midnight lights of Manhattan. Black cars lined the curb while camera flashes still flickered behind the ballroom windows upstairs. Somewhere above her, Victoria Ashford was probably still smiling for photographs beside Damien Sterling while wealthy donors toasted to their future. Evelyn wrapped her coat tighter around herself and exhaled slowly into the cold night air. New York smelled different when your heart was broken. Sharper somehow. Colder. The city did not care who survived it. Footsteps echoed behind her. Calm. Unhurried. Nathaniel Graves stopped beside her beneath the hotel canopy, the glow from the chandelier inside reflecting faintly against the dark wool of his coat. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than he had inside the ballroom. Not because he was loud, but because truly powerful people never needed to raise their voices. A black SUV waited near the curb with the engine running. The driver stood silently beside the open door. Nathaniel glanced toward the rain-soaked street before speaking again. "Most people would have cried in there," he said quietly. Evelyn gave a faint smile without looking at him. "Most people would not have survived what I survived." For the first time that evening, Nathaniel almost smiled back. "Almost." "No," he said. "I suppose they would not." A gust of cold wind swept through the avenue, carrying distant sirens and the scent of wet pavement. Evelyn rubbed her fingers together slowly, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. Not physically, emotionally, like she had spent years carrying invisible weight nobody else noticed. Nathaniel studied her for a moment before removing a thin cream-colored envelope from inside his coat. Expensive paper. No markings on the outside. He handed it to her carefully. What is this? Evelyn asked. Something that should have belonged to you a long time ago. She frowned slightly, but did not open it yet. I do not understand. Nathaniel looked back toward the towering hotel windows above them, where the Sterling family crest glowed gold against the night sky. That is because the Sterling family spent 30 years making sure you never would. Evelyn stared at him, confused. Before she could speak again, Nathaniel opened the SUV door for her himself. Get in, he said calmly. You deserve to know who you really are before they decide to destroy what is left of your name. 20 minutes later, the city lights blurred beyond the tinted windows as the car moved through Manhattan traffic. Neither of them spoke much during the drive. Soft classical music played through hidden speakers while rain slid across the glass like silver threads. Evelyn finally looked down at the envelope resting in her lap. Her name had been typed across the front in elegant black lettering. Evelyn Monroe. Her chest tightened strangely. She opened it carefully. Inside were copies of old photographs, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, legal documents, and one black-and-white portrait of a woman standing beside the original founder of Sterling Group nearly 50 years earlier. Evelyn froze instantly. The woman in the photograph looked exactly like her mother. Same eyes, same smile, same delicate features. Beneath the image was a name written in faded ink. Eleanor Monroe Sterling. Evelyn's breathing slowed. That is impossible, she whispered. Nathaniel watched her reaction carefully from the opposite seat. Your mother changed her last name before you were born, he said quietly. And certain people worked very hard to erase why. Evelyn looked back down at the photograph while thunder rolled faintly across the city skyline outside. Every painful memory from the ballroom suddenly felt different now. Less random, less cruel, almost intentional. As if Victoria's humiliation had not been about jealousy at all. It had been fear. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, his voice low and steady. Evelyn, he said, the Sterling Empire was never supposed to belong to Damien's family. There are moments in life when the truth does not arrive like an explosion. It arrives like a quiet door unlocking inside your soul. By the time the black SUV stopped in front of Nathaniel Graves' penthouse overlooking Central Park, Evelyn felt like the entire world beneath her feet had shifted. The elevator opened directly into a private residence wrapped in warm amber light and floor-to-ceiling glass windows that revealed the glittering Manhattan skyline below. Everything inside the penthouse was elegant without trying too hard. Dark marble floors, soft jazz playing somewhere in the distance, shelves lined with rare books instead of trophies. The kind of wealth that no longer needed to prove itself. Evelyn stepped slowly into the room, still holding the envelope against her chest. Nathaniel loosened his tie slightly and walked toward a long table near the fireplace where several old documents already waited beside crystal glasses of untouched water. Sit, he said calmly. Evelyn obeyed without speaking. Her mind was still trapped inside that black and white photograph. Her mother had never talked much about her family before she passed away. Only fragments. Small things. Stories about old summers near Cape Cod. A grandfather who disappeared from public life. A house that was sold before Evelyn was born. At the time, none of it seemed important. Now, every memory felt loaded with meaning. Nathaniel slid a thin leather folder toward her. The woman in that photograph, he said carefully, was Eleanor Monroe Sterling, daughter of Charles Sterling, the original founder of Sterling Group. Evelyn looked down at the documents with trembling fingers. That would make my mother the rightful bloodline heir, Nathaniel finished quietly. Silence filled the room. Heavy, almost sacred. Outside the windows, Manhattan glowed beneath the rain like a kingdom built from gold and glass. Evelyn opened the folder slowly. Birth certificates, trust agreements, archived newspaper articles from the 1970s, legal correspondence hidden for decades. One document contained the official transfer of control from Charles Sterling to Damien's grandfather shortly after Eleanor disappeared from the public eye. Another page showed private financial settlements tied to Eleanor's sudden removal from company leadership discussions. Evelyn's chest tightened painfully. They erased her, she whispered. Nathaniel nodded once. And after your mother died, they assumed the last connection to the Sterling bloodline disappeared with her. Evelyn leaned back slowly, trying to steady her breathing. Then why did Victoria humiliate me tonight? Nathaniel's eyes darkened slightly. Because someone recently discovered you still existed. A cold chill moved through Evelyn's body. Nathaniel stepped toward the windows overlooking the city. 3 months ago, Sterling Group began preparing legal restructuring for generational succession. During the internal review process, old family archives resurfaced. He turned back toward her carefully. Victoria. Saw your name. Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. Suddenly the ballroom made sense. The photographs. The cruelty. The calculated humiliation disguised as elegance. It had never been about jealousy over Damien. It was about power. They needed Evelyn to look weak, unimportant, disposable, because powerful families survive by controlling perception long before they control truth. Nathaniel walked back toward the table and placed one final document in front of her. Unlike the others, this one looked recent, official, current. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the signature line and froze instantly. It was an invitation to the Sterling Legacy Foundation Gala scheduled in 2 weeks. The event where Damien Sterling would officially announce the next generation leadership transition beside Victoria Ashford. Every major investor in New York would attend. Nathaniel's voice became very still. That night, he said, they planned to crown themselves in front of the entire world. Evelyn slowly lifted her eyes toward him. And what happens if the world learns the crown was never theirs to begin with? For the first time since she met him, Nathaniel Graves smiled completely. Calm. Dangerous. Certain. Then, he said softly, an empire falls in a single evening. Power does not panic when it is challenged. Power panics when the truth finally learns how to speak. The next morning, New York woke beneath pale gray skies and cold spring rain tapping softly against the windows of Nathaniel Graves' penthouse. Evelyn had not slept more than 2 hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her mother's face in that old photograph beside the Sterling founder. The resemblance haunted her now, not because it shocked her, because somewhere deep down, it explained things she had spent her entire life trying to understand. Why her mother always became nervous whenever the Sterling name appeared on television. Why certain family photographs mysteriously disappeared after her mother passed away. Why there was always sadness hiding behind her mother's smile whenever conversations drifted toward wealth or inheritance. Nathaniel stood near the kitchen island pouring coffee into 2 porcelain cups, while sunlight slowly pushed through the storm clouds beyond Central Park. He looked calm as always, controlled, like a man who had spent decades learning how to survive rooms full of dangerous people. Evelyn sat across from him wrapped in one of the cashmere blankets from the guest suite, staring at the stack of documents spread across the marble counter. Why are you helping me? She finally asked quietly. Nathaniel handed her the coffee before answering. Because I owed your mother my loyalty long before Damien Sterling was ever born. Evelyn looked up sharply. Nathaniel leaned one hand against the counter, his expression unreadable. Your grandfather and I built our first investment firm together when I was 32 years old, he explained. Charles Sterling trusted me. Eleanor trusted me. He paused briefly. Then the Sterling board betrayed her after Charles became ill. Evelyn lowered her eyes slowly toward the documents again. The deeper she looked into the records, the uglier the story became. Hidden agreements, altered succession paperwork, confidential settlements disguised as charitable transfers. Every page revealed another layer of calculated silence. Her mother had not walked away from the empire willingly. She had been pushed out carefully, quietly, professionally. The kind of destruction wealthy families preferred because it left no visible blood on the floor. Nathaniel slid another folder toward her. This one contained modern financial reports tied to Sterling Group. Victoria Ashford discovered the archived bloodline records 4 months ago during legal preparation for the foundation transfer, he said. That is when your life suddenly became a problem. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. Suddenly, every strange coincidence over the last year made sense. The fake kindness from Damien before the gala invitation. The random articles online subtly mocking her failed marriage. The social circles that once ignored her suddenly treating her like entertainment. They had been managing her image before eliminating her credibility completely. Nathaniel's voice became colder now. If the world sees you as weak, bitter, unstable, or desperate, then nobody questions why the Sterling family erased you. Evelyn stood slowly and walked toward the massive windows overlooking Manhattan. Below her, yellow taxis crawled through wet streets while the city rushed forward without mercy. Somewhere inside one of those skyscrapers, Damian Sterling was probably preparing speeches about legacy and family honor while standing on top of a fortune that legally belonged to her bloodline. Strangely, she no longer felt heartbreak when she thought about him. Only clarity, the kind that arrives after pain burns away illusion. Nathaniel approached her quietly. "You still love him," he observed carefully. Evelyn stared at the rain sliding down the glass. "No," she answered softly after a long silence. "I love the man he used to be before power taught him to forget people." Nathaniel studied her for a moment before reaching into his coat pocket. He handed her another envelope. Heavy, cream-colored, embossed with the Sterling family crest in gold. Evelyn opened it carefully, and her pulse slowed instantly. Official invitation. Sterling Legacy Foundation Gala. Private heir announcement ceremony. Black tie required. Victoria Ashford's name appeared beside Damian's in elegant gold lettering beneath the event title. Nathaniel's reflection appeared faintly in the glass beside her. "They invited you because they think humiliation will keep you silent," he said calmly. Evelyn folded the invitation slowly between her fingers. Outside, thunder rolled across Manhattan again. This time, she did not look afraid. "Good," she whispered. "Let them believe that." Revenge becomes dangerous the moment a broken woman stops asking for fairness and starts understanding her value. 2 weeks later, Manhattan glittered beneath a sky clear enough to make the city look almost unreal. Black luxury cars lined the entrance of the Sterling Legacy Foundation Gala, while photographers shouted names across the red carpet outside the historic Astoria Crown Ballroom. Inside, crystal chandeliers reflected against gold-trimmed walls and towers of white orchids arranged beneath enormous banners carrying the Sterling family crest. Tonight was not just another elite charity event. Tonight was the official beginning of a dynasty. Investors had flown in from Los Angeles, London, and Dubai. Political figures moved through the ballroom beside celebrities and financial reporters. Every conversation carried the same expectation. Damian Sterling and Victoria Ashford were about to become untouchable. Upstairs in a private suite nearly 20 floors above the ballroom, Evelyn Monroe stood silently in front of a floor-length mirror while Manhattan glowed beyond the windows behind her. A stylist adjusted the final details of her ivory silk gown before quietly leaving the room. The dress was elegant without looking desperate for attention. Soft fabric, clean lines, old Hollywood sophistication. The kind of beauty that did not scream wealth because it already belonged beside it naturally. Evelyn stared at her reflection for several long seconds. She barely recognized the woman looking back at her now. Not because she had changed physically, because the fear was gone. Nathaniel Graves stood near the fireplace, fastening silver cufflinks beneath the warm amber light of the suite. "Nervous?" he asked calmly. Evelyn let out the faintest smile. "A little." Nathaniel nodded once as if he respected the honesty. "Good. Fear keeps people careful." He walked toward her slowly, holding a small velvet box in one hand. Evelyn frowned slightly as he opened it. Inside rested an antique diamond brooch shaped like a crown surrounded by emeralds. Elegant. Timeless. Nathaniel lifted it carefully. "This belonged to your grandfather's wife," he said quietly. "Eleanor wore it at every major Sterling event before she disappeared from public life." Evelyn's breath caught softly. Nathaniel pinned the brooch near her shoulder with steady hands. "Tonight," he continued, "they will see a woman they tried to erase standing exactly where she was always meant to stand." Downstairs, the ballroom buzzed with excitement as Damian Sterling prepared for his speech near the grand stage. Cameras flashed endlessly around Victoria Ashford while reporters praised her beauty, her political connections, her future influence beside the Sterling Empire. Victoria wore a custom silver gown covered in crystals that sparkled beneath every chandelier in the room. She looked flawless, victorious, completely certain the night belonged to her. "Do you think she will actually show up?" one socialite whispered near the champagne tower. Victoria laughed lightly without concern. "Please," she replied smoothly. "Women like Evelyn only appear when they need attention." Several guests laughed with her. Then the ballroom doors opened. Slowly at first, quietly enough that only a few people noticed. But silence spreads quickly in wealthy rooms whenever someone unexpected enters them. One by one, conversations stopped. Glasses lowered. Heads turned toward the entrance beneath the golden chandeliers. Nathaniel Graves stepped into the ballroom first, wearing a black tuxedo tailored with terrifying perfection. Calm, controlled, powerful enough that half the investors near the stage instantly straightened their posture. Then Evelyn entered beside him. The ivory silk gown moved softly across the marble floor while emeralds glimmered against her shoulder beneath the ballroom lights. She did not rush. She did not smile for cameras. She simply walked forward with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed permission to exist in the room. Damien froze near the stage the second he saw her. Victoria's expression cracked almost invisibly for the first time all evening. Because the woman entering that ballroom was no longer the broken ex-wife they invited to humiliate. She looked like someone returning to claim something that had always belonged to her. The most terrifying woman in the room is not the loudest one. It is the woman who already knows the truth everyone else is still pretending to own. The silence inside the Astoria Crown ballroom spread slowly at first, then completely. Conversations faded beneath the soft orchestra music while hundreds of eyes followed Evelyn Monroe crossing the marble floor beside Nathaniel Graves. Camera flashes exploded across the room, but Evelyn never looked toward them. She looked straight ahead. Calm, elegant, unshaken. The same people who laughed at her 2 weeks earlier now stared at her like they were trying to solve a mystery too. Expensive to ignore. Damien Sterling stepped away from the stage instinctively, his expression tightening as Evelyn approached. Victoria recovered faster than he did. She lifted her chin and forced a polished smile back onto her face before gliding toward them in silver heels. Evelyn, she said sweetly enough to fool anyone who had never seen cruelty dressed in diamonds before. I was surprised you accepted the invitation. Evelyn met her gaze evenly. You seemed determined for me to attend. A few nearby guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nathaniel remained silent beside her, one hand resting calmly in his pocket, while Wall Street executives openly watched him with growing confusion. Powerful men rarely attended events without purpose. Victoria laughed lightly and touched Damien's arm possessively. Well, she replied, tonight is about family legacy. It felt appropriate for old memories to witness new beginnings. Damien still had not spoken. Evelyn noticed immediately. Years ago, she would have mistaken his silence for conflict or guilt. Tonight, she recognized it for what it really was. Fear. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as event staff signaled the beginning of the foundation ceremony. A massive gold sterling crest illuminated behind the stage, while waiters quietly moved through the crowd collecting champagne glasses. Victoria smiled toward the audience with practiced perfection. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced into the microphone. Thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate the future of the Sterling Legacy Foundation and the next generation of leadership. Applause filled the room. Damien finally stepped beside her, though his attention kept drifting toward Evelyn standing near the front of the ballroom beside Nathaniel Graves. Victoria continued smoothly. The Sterling family has always represented excellence, tradition, and generational vision. Nathaniel lowered his eyes briefly as if amused by the sentence. Evelyn noticed. Then Victoria smiled directly toward her from the stage. And of course, she added carefully, we all know true legacy depends on protecting the right bloodline. The room laughed softly again. Smaller this time, more cautious. Because nobody understood why Nathaniel Graves still looked completely relaxed. Victoria extended her hand toward Damien proudly. Tonight, Damien Sterling officially becomes chairman of the next generational trust overseeing Sterling Group assets and foundation control. More applause erupted across the ballroom. Investors nodded approvingly. Cameras flashed endlessly. Damien reached for the ceremonial documents placed on the podium. Then Nathaniel Graves finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward through the crowd until the entire ballroom instinctively quieted again. Even the orchestra stopped playing. Nathaniel adjusted the cuff of his black tuxedo before speaking in a calm voice powerful enough to silence every person in the room. I apologize for interrupting, he said politely. But there appears to be a legal issue regarding the rightful heir to the Sterling Generational Trust. The temperature inside the ballroom seemed to drop instantly. Victoria's smile froze. Damien looked pale beneath the stage lights. Nathaniel reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and removed a sealed leather folder embossed with official court markings. Before this ceremony proceeds, he continued, The board and investors deserve access to information intentionally hidden from the public for over 3 decades. Murmurs exploded across the ballroom now. Reporters immediately lifted phones. Investors exchanged alarmed whispers. Victoria stepped forward sharply. "Nathaniel, this is neither the time nor the place for theatrics." Nathaniel turned toward her calmly. "You are correct," he replied. "This is the place for truth." Then he opened the folder and revealed the first document to the room. An original Sterling bloodline record bearing the name Eleanor Monroe Sterling. Evelyn felt every eye in the ballroom shift toward her at once. Nathaniel's voice remained perfectly steady. "The woman standing beside me," he announced, "is not Damien Sterling's forgotten ex-wife." He paused just long enough for silence to become unbearable. She is the last surviving direct heir to the original Sterling family bloodline. The fall of a dynasty never. Sounds dramatic at first. Sometimes it begins with nothing more than silence inside a ballroom full of rich people realizing they backed the wrong family. For several endless seconds after Nathaniel Graves revealed the bloodline documents, nobody inside the Astoria-crowned ballroom moved. The orchestra remained frozen. Champagne glasses hovered in midair. Even the reporters looked stunned beneath the white stage lights. Then the whispers began. "Fast. Sharp. Dangerous. Did he say direct heir? Is this real? How long has the board known?" Camera flashes exploded across the room as journalists rushed toward the stage. Investors who had spent years worshipping the Sterling Empire suddenly looked uncertain for the first time in decades. Because money fears scandal more than failure. Victoria Ashford's polished smile finally disappeared completely. "This is absurd," she snapped, stepping toward Nathaniel with visible panic beneath her voice now. "Those documents are private family records taken out of context." Nathaniel remained perfectly calm. "The records were verified this morning by 3 independent legal firms," he replied evenly, "including your own." The color drained from Victoria's face instantly. Across the ballroom, Damien Sterling stared at Evelyn like he no longer recognized the woman standing before him. But Evelyn never looked away. Not once. She stood quietly beside Nathaniel in the ivory silk gown, while the entire empire that once discarded her began cracking beneath the weight of truth. One of the investors near the front raised his voice sharply. "Damien, did you know about this?" Another followed immediately. Was the succession transfer built on disputed ownership? More voices joined now. Louder. More aggressive. The atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted from celebration to survival in less than 60 seconds. Damien stepped toward the microphone finally, his composure visibly slipping. "There has clearly been some misunderstanding regarding historical records," he began carefully. "Sterling Group remains fully stable and legally protected." But nobody was listening anymore. Screens across the ballroom suddenly lit up with breaking financial alerts as news outlets picked up the story in real time. Sterling Group shares began dropping before Damien even finished speaking. 10%, 15, 23. Reporters flooded social media with photographs of Evelyn standing beside Nathaniel Graves beneath headlines questioning the legitimacy of the Sterling family succession. Victoria turned toward Damien sharply, fury flashing behind her eyes. "Fix this," she whispered harshly through clenched teeth. But for the first time in his life, Damien Sterling looked powerless. Nathaniel opened the leather folder again and handed additional documents to several board members standing near the stage. These include original succession agreements, bloodline verification, archived trust amendments, and financial concealment records tied to Eleanor Monroe Sterling's removal from inheritance proceedings. One older board member nearly lost his balance reading the papers. Another quietly removed his glasses, staring down at the documents like they might somehow change if he looked hard enough. Evelyn noticed something then that surprised her. She did not feel revenge. She did not feel satisfaction either. Only stillness. Like the pain she carried for years had finally stopped screaming inside her chest. Victoria suddenly stepped down from the stage and approached Evelyn directly. Her voice lowered enough that only nearby guests could hear. "You think this makes you powerful?" she hissed. Evelyn looked at her calmly. "No," she answered softly. "I think the truth makes people uncomfortable." Victoria's expression twisted. "You are destroying an entire family." Evelyn's eyes never wavered. "No," she said quietly. Your family destroyed themselves the moment they decided my mother's name was disposable. Nearby cameras captured every second of the exchange. Across the ballroom, investors were already leaving. Phones rang nonstop. Lawyers whispered urgently in corners. Sterling executives looked pale beneath the chandeliers as decades of carefully protected prestige collapsed in real time. Then Damien finally walked slowly toward Evelyn through the chaos surrounding them. The same man she once loved in a tiny apartment. Outside Chicago now looked older somehow. Smaller. He stopped only a few feet away from her, his voice barely above a whisper. Why did you never tell me? Evelyn studied him for a long moment beneath the golden ballroom lights. Then she gave the saddest smile he had ever seen. Because, she said softly, I did not know my life was something your family stole before you entered it. The most powerful revenge is not watching someone lose everything. It is realizing you no longer need anything from them at all. 3 months later, the Sterling name no longer ruled Manhattan the way it once had. Financial magazines called it the fastest social collapse in modern corporate history. Lawsuits flooded the company. Investors abandoned partnerships overnight. Board members resigned quietly before investigations could pull them into the scandal. The same elite circles that once worshipped Damien Sterling and Victoria Ashford now pretended they had never truly known them. Wealthy people always moved away from disaster faster than ordinary people did. The headlines faded eventually, but the silence left behind was louder than the scandal itself. On a cool October evening, golden light spilled through the windows of the newly restored Monroe Foundation building overlooking the Hudson River. The structure had once belonged to Eleanor Monroe Sterling before her name disappeared from history. Now the bronze plaque outside carried a different title beneath the autumn lights. The Monroe Foundation for Women Rebuilding Their Lives. No Sterling name remained anywhere on the building. Inside the grand ballroom, soft piano music floated through the air while guests gathered for the foundation's opening ceremony. But unlike the old Sterling events, this room felt different. Warmer somehow. Real. Teachers stood beside business owners. Single mothers spoke with scholarship recipients. Women who once lost homes, careers, marriages, and identities now laughed together beneath chandeliers that no longer belonged to a family obsessed with appearances. Evelyn Monroe moved quietly through the room in a dark emerald gown, greeting guests with calm elegance. She no longer looked like someone haunted by survival. She looked like a woman finally at peace inside her own life. Near the windows overlooking the river, Nathaniel Graves watched her with quiet admiration while holding a glass of sparkling water. You could have taken everything for yourself, he said softly when she approached him. Evelyn glanced around the ballroom, filled with women rebuilding futures that once seemed impossible. I already did, she answered gently. Nathaniel smiled faintly. Do you ever regret not destroying them completely? Evelyn thought about the question for a moment. Somewhere across the city, Damien Sterling was reportedly selling family properties to settle financial claims. Victoria Ashford had disappeared almost entirely from public life after political donors quietly distanced themselves from her family. The empire that once humiliated Evelyn no longer controlled headlines, investors, or society. But strangely, none of that mattered to her anymore. Evelyn looked through the windows toward the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the evening sky. No, she said quietly, because revenge was never the point. Nathaniel remained silent beside her while soft music echoed through the ballroom. Evelyn's reflection shimmered faintly against the glass now. Strong, calm, untouchable. She remembered the woman sitting alone in the Sterling Imperial Hotel months earlier while strangers laughed at old photographs on a giant screen. That woman had believed she lost everything. She had no idea she was about to find herself instead. One of the young scholarship recipients approached Evelyn nervously near the stage holding a small envelope in her hands. Miss Monroe, she said softly, I just wanted to thank you. Because of this foundation, I get to finish law school next year. Evelyn smiled warmly and accepted the handwritten letter. Then promise me something, she replied gently. When life finally becomes kind to you, be kind to someone else too. The young woman nodded with tears in her eyes before walking away. Nathaniel studied Evelyn carefully beneath the amber lights. Your mother would have been proud of you, he said quietly. Evelyn lowered her eyes toward the old emerald brooch resting near her shoulder. Eleanor's brooch. Her family's history. Her truth. For years, she thought dignity meant surviving humiliation in silence. Now she understood something deeper. Dignity was becoming so whole that the people who broke you no longer had the power to define your story. Outside, Manhattan glittered endlessly beneath the night sky, while warm light poured from the Monroe Foundation windows into the darkness beyond. And somewhere far behind her, an empire built on stolen legacy disappeared quietly into history. But Evelyn Monroe did not look back.